Hello, everyone. My name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal News Hour. Hello. Oh boy, did I not have my act together this week. Oh, did we have a live event set up for this? No. Am I starting the stream 15 minutes late? Also, yes. I haven't even done clips for Friday's interview, much less today's interview. It's a disaster here. I've been working through a little bit of a crisis with the Cameron Journal. For some reason, there is an error in how Google is reporting my traffic on the Cameron Journal, and so I have advertising clients who are convinced that I have no traffic anymore and all you've gone away, and I'm kind of like, no, we just have a reporting issue. So, spent a lot of the day working on that. Spent a lot of the day trying to solve that problem, and I ended up doing a lot of work on Saturday, so I really only had Sunday to chill, and that means I kind of crash into Monday, and so yeah, and I've crashed into this show as well. I had a recording earlier, and I was up and dealing with email, and there's just a lot of things happening right now. A lot of things, going on. But I want to remind everyone, if you are a Cameron Journal Plus subscriber, thank you so much for coming. If you are not, please make sure to do support the Cameron Journal by signing up for Cameron Journal Plus. You get exclusive hangouts with me, and support great journalism and this show, which is really important. Head over to CameronJournal.com/subscribe. Saturday's newsletter was extremely entertaining and had lots of great info. If you want to get that newsletter delivered to your inbox, make sure to head over to CameronJournal.com/newsletter. And sign up for that. I know that there's actually a new collection, so 2 new things are happening right now. As I've mentioned, I've started a new buddy podcast with Will and Connor called The Living Joke that airs on Wednesdays right here on the Cameron Journal. The response to that has been really awesome, and we're moving forward with all sorts of stuff. The video content on YouTube is probably going to stay here on the Cameron Journal, at least for now, but we are reposting everything over on Rumble, so if you want to head over there, and you can watch gaming content, you can watch the podcast, it's all happening over there. We also have a Substack going, which is going to host art and a lot of different things, including the podcast as well. So thelivingjoke.substack.com, you can get all of our stuff delivered right to your inbox. The other thing that's happening is my new 10-part collection on millennials is publishing now and going out via email to people. I took kind of the 10 best parts of my book and put them together in this really great promotional series, and we're calling it the Millennials Collection. If you go over to CameronJournal.com/millennials, I have a bunch of other millennial content in there, all the stuff I've written from the past, a lot of videos that I've shared as the years have gone by, and this new collection are all in there. But if you want the new stuff delivered to your inbox, sign up for the newsletter. CameronJournal.com/newsletter. So we have a lot of things going on. I got all that content set up last week. And it was good. It was a lot of fun. It was really interesting to kind of see all of that finally come together. But obviously that's all in support of my upcoming book, America's Lost Generation, which is the story of millennials. In fact, the person I was interviewing today, We were talking about that. Her organization offers kind of real life writing and job training, and leadership training for young people, and and that was a really great conversation. We got a little bit into topics around ALG and all this sort of thing. So there's a lot of things happening, which is why I'm a little tired. And tomorrow I'm leaving to go to. I have to go to Delaware and run some errands. So it's gonna be great. It's gonna be a great week. We're gonna be. We're gonna be okay. We're gonna be okay. Right. Right. And it's also a busy week on the headlines. There's a lot. Especially the breaking news with President Trump and the Education Department. So, without further ado, let's turn to the headlines. Here we go. And here we are. So, this just came through this evening. It says here, I'll put my glasses on so I can see. In a major victory for the Trump administration, the Supreme Court on Monday let it fire more than 1,000 Education Department employees and functionally eliminate the agency. The court's decision, while technically temporary, lets workers who had been reinstated during the legal battle be fired again. The department manages federal loans for college, tracks student achievement, and enforces civil rights laws in school. Let's read more. The Trump administration has announced plans to fire more than 1,300 workers, a move that would effectively gut the department, which manages... Yes, the Department of Education began the year with more than 4,000 employees. The administration also fired some probationary workers and offered employees the ability to resign. Altogether, after the terminations, the Education Department will have a workforce of about half the size it did before Mr. Trump returned to office. The move by the justices to represent an expansion of presidential power, allowing Mr. Trump to dismantle the inner workings of a government department created by Congress without legislators' input. The firings will hobble much of the department's work, supporters argued in court filings. Particularly hard hit was the department's Office for Civil Rights, which had 7 of its 12 offices shuttered. It comes after a decision by the justices last week that cleared the way for the Trump administration to move forward with cutting thousands of jobs across a number of federal agencies, including the Departments of Housing and Urban Development, State, and Treasury. The order by the court was unsigned and gave no reasoning, as is typical in such emergency applications. No vote count was given, which is unusual for emergency orders, but Justice Sonia Sotomayor wrote a dissent, joined by the court's 2 other liberals, Justice Lena Kagan and Ketanji Brown Jackson. The 3 argued that Mr. Trump had overstepped his authority with his unilateral efforts to eliminate a cabinet-level agency established by Congress nearly a half-century ago. Quote, only Congress has the power to abolish the department, unquote, Justice Sotomayor wrote in her 19-page dissent. The court's decision, she wrote, would have severe consequences for the country's students by unleashing untold harm, delaying or denying educational opportunities, and leaving students to suffer from discrimination, sexual assault, and other civil rights violations without the federal resources Congress intended. Of course, the White House praised the decision, and it says down here, the effort from the Trump administration to dismantle the Department of Education is playing with the futures of millions of Americans, and after just 4 months, the consequences are already evident across our education system, Sharia Smith, the president of the American Federation of Government Employees, Local 252, said in a statement. Obviously, there was an executive order back in January to get rid of the Department of Education. The Trump administration replied in court filings that the department, quote, had determined it can carry out its statutorily mandated functions with a pared-down staff, that many discretionary functions are better left to the states. So that's fun. Definitely fun. There was some other fun stories in here, like apparently we're gonna tariff to Mexican tomatoes. It says here the Trump administration announced Monday it would impose a 17% tariff on most imports of tomatoes from Mexico, as it withdrew from a decades-old trade agreement that had prevented those levies from snapping into place. The tariffs will add to the price of a grocery store staple for many Americans, while also funneling more business to domestic tomato growers, largely in Florida. The levy stemmed from a nearly 30-year-old trade case that found Mexican tomato growers to be selling their products in the United States at unfairly low prices. The U.S. tomato industry brought a case against their Mexican competitors in 1996, arguing that Mexican tomatoes dumped into the United States were injuring American growers. A U.S. trade court agreed with them and ordered tariffs be imposed. But on 5 occasions since then, in 1996, 2002, 2008, 2013, and 2019, the United States agreed to suspend the tariffs as long as Mexican growers would keep their prices above a certain minimum level. The United States said and Mexico had been in recent talks about entering into a new agreement. So, that's, that's the new tomato tax. So, it's another chapter in the trade war in addition to the tariffs that were put on the EU last week as well, which were have been on off on again off again sort of thing, and I'm not quite sure if it's just a negotiating tactic or what, or if he's trying to get the EU to go along with something, whatever have you. Um, so uh, so that's fine. But it's just another chapter in the trade war. We're gonna keep seeing this all the time. We're already starting to see a bit of inflation from tariffs. The federal government has collected $100 billion already in tariffs, and that just means the federal government is taking $100 billion out of yours and my pockets, because it's the consumer or the domestic producer that pays the tariff. If the person selling it here has to pay the tax, then they're going to pass at least some of that cost on. So we're paying. So when the next time you want something that involves a tomato, and it's going to come from Mexico, especially in the winter, guess what? You're paying a tax on it. The tomato tax. What else have we got? Oh yes, this is good. So as we all know, one of the big stories in the 2024 election was how women really lurched right, and young women lurched right, white women lurched right, young women lurched left, white women lurched right, young men lurched right, college educated women lurched left in a big way. And there is a new wave of conservative influencers and magazines that are looking to reverse that trend. Oh, is this paywalled? I didn't really look. If it was, which is unfortunate. I might be able to do this and that, and it might let us watch. No, not even close. Anyway, let me do this. Anyway, there's this story which you unfortunately can't read because it's paywalled. The bulk of the story and the bulk of this trend, because I found it on Twitter and a bunch of other stuff. The bulk of it has to do with the new sets of sort of right wing influence that brings together a little bit of everything to, and it kind of is an outgrowth of that whole trad wife thing. That's like the ballerina farms, all that sort of trad wife, get married, have kids, all this type of thing, kind of an outgrowth of that. And there's some new publications and influencers kind of promoting that as an ideal. It's something new. It's something new in the narrative that I thought was interesting. I'm really sad that it's paywalled, but this is, very common now. I don't blame CNN for wanting to make a buck. But we're going to move on to this story. It was going to be short and anecdotal. You're not missing anything. However, we are going to talk about LA immigration raids, which is much more interesting. And we have a subscription to the New York Times. It says here, a federal judge temporarily halted the administration from making indiscriminate arrests based on race and denying detainees access to lawyers in a lawsuit that could have national repercussions. It says here, a federal judge in California blocked the Trump administration on Friday from making indiscriminate immigration arrests in the Los Angeles area and from denying detainees the right to consult with a lawyer. The two temporary restraining orders issued by the judge represent a sharp rebuke of tactics that federal agents have employed in and around Los Angeles during waves of immigration raids that began last month. In the orders, not going to pronounce that, Mame Frimpong of the U.S. District Court for Central District of California directed agents to stop racially profiling in the course of seeking out immigrants and mandated that the federal government, which has deployed hundreds of agents from Immigration and Customs Enforcement and other agencies in Los Angeles County, ensure detainees have access to legal counsel. What the federal government would have this court believe, in the face of a mountain of evidence presented in this case, is that none of this is actually happening, the judge wrote of the tactics barred in her order. She said that, quote, roving patrols, unquote, without reasonable suspicion violated the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, and that denying access to lawyers violated the Fifth Amendment. The ruling, which remains in place up to 10 days, came in response to a lawsuit filed last week by immigrant advocacy groups led by the American Civil Liberties Union of Southern California and the nonprofit Public Counsel. A fuller hearing is expected in the coming weeks as the groups seek a more durable order known as a preliminary injunction. Los Angeles, the largest city and largest blue state, has become the center of President Trump's efforts to ramp up immigration arrests and achieve his pledge of mass deportations. It is also about 30% Latino and is home to the nation's largest population of undocumented people. During a hearing on Thursday, the judge was skeptical of the government's assertions it was not violating the constitutional rights of people and that agents were stopping immigrants based on the totality of circumstances rather than relying on race. In addition to ICE, which is responsible for detaining and deporting immigrants, the Trump administration has tapped the Border Patrol, the FBI, and the Drug Enforcement Administration to assist with an aggressive enforcement operation in Los Angeles that prompted several days of protests last month. Agents have arrested people in parking lots, in tow yards, and on job sites like restaurants. Some encounters have been captured on bystander video, and in some instances, the arrests have appeared to be roundups of random Hispanic people by armed agents who drive up in unmarked vehicles in military or plain clothes wearing masks. Mark Rosenbaum, a lawyer with Public Counsel, said, quote, the order reflects that there is something very wrong when the federal government goes to war against an American city and ignores the Constitution, he added. Quote, hopefully this ends the actions of the government rounding up car wash workers and other hardworking people like they were domestic terrorists. The mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, said the judge's ruling represented, quote, American values and decency. During the hearing on Thursday, Sean Skudlewski, that's a nice Polish name, a lawyer for the federal government, defended the tactics that the agents had been using in Los Angeles. He said that when they encountered people whom they weren't initially targeting, quote, agents can put blinders on. Judge Frimpong described the government arguments as very general, saying that they did not really engage with the high volume of evidence that the plaintiffs put on the record of things we've all seen and heard on the news. It says, the 52-page ruling, Judge Frimpong said the government may not rely solely alone or in combination on race or ethnicity, on a person speaking Spanish or English with an accent, or on a person's presence at a particular location, such as a day labor or agricultural site, or the type of work performed to establish reasonable suspicion to stop and detain people. And, I mean, this was coming. I mean, it's California. Somebody was going to say not so fast. And I think other places are going to start, citing this case. It's not the national injunction thing is kind of not a thing anymore. But someone was going to block this sort of thing somewhere along the way. There's enough immigrant groups and whatnot. They were going to find some judge somewhere with the authority to do it. And they found Judge Frimpong here. I think if we're going to be serious about immigration, and I think we should be serious in immigration, there's kind of three things to do. One, they are doing, and that's encouraging self-deportation, which I think is very important. The other one, which I think is equally important, is they're doing an excellent. I think the other thing that they could be doing is not arresting people at immigration hearings and actually taking the time to find actually undocumented people. Back in the 90s, Bill Clinton deported 20 million people. And it wasn't like this. Obama was the deporter in chief. He was putting the kids in cages long before Trump was. And that was, there's I think if they set up an actual process for this, where people, much like they did in the first term with the stay in Mexico policy, set an actual process. Instead, they're just running around, because they're not getting the numbers that they were hoping for, they're just running around town snatching people off the road. I think there needs to be a different process for this. I'm not saying that we need to do another, mass amnesty, although there is a rumor that Trump is thinking about mass amnesty. Of course, right now everyone's directed with the whole Epstein thing. But that was, I watched a video about that today. That was entertaining. There needs to be an actual, reasonable process for this that at least kind of sort of follows the law, rather than just running around town looking for any old place to pick people up, or doing workplace raids, or whatever have you. It is very obvious to me that I think a lot of people are very frustrated with how society is changing. And immigration the blame is going straight onto immigrants and immigration, and I don't think that's entirely misplaced. But here's kind of the sad thing about this is when you raid the Home Depot parking lot, you are raiding illegal immigrants who are on the fringe. You are kind of going after the most vulnerable people in any given system, which I mean, I think that has its own sort of sadness to it, sort of thing, just simply because they're not getting the numbers they hope for, and they want, they want more, they want to, be getting more people and putting them on planes and all this sort of thing. I think there's a lot of people, if you set up an actual process to evaluate claims, do you have family or all this sort of thing, and you sort of go through that process, you're going to get a lot of the numbers. You're not going to have legal issues. You're not going to have the protests of people just, I mean, this is basically a kind of a Gestapo situation, just running around. And we're going to actually have an interesting story about that I found on Twitter. It's like a Gestapo running around. And immigration is something which I'm very conservative. I'm broadly in favor of not having a whole lot of immigration for a while we kind of work out the social ramifications that we have. But that goes for like H-1B visas too. That even goes for a lot of these companies who hire in H-1B visas for no other reason than Americans won't work for the paltry wages they want to pay. I'm broadly in favor of really just ratcheting down immigration, capping the amount of student visas, so the colleges will expand their seats so more Americans can get in. I am broadly in favor of I'm broadly in favor of keeping, we have this kind of weird country quota system, and I think a lot of those should be held down as well. I think it also needs to be more inexpensive, to come to America. I think a temporary workers program would be very helpful. Most people don't know it's actually, in a kind of a weird way, incredibly difficult to come to this country. There's a lot of things within the existing system that need some reform, and I think with those things put in, you could sufficiently tamp down immigration in a productive way. One of the kind of mistakes that was made along the way, as the 90s came to a close into the 2000s, there had been some significant reforms of what was then called the Immigration and Naturalization Service, or INS. After 9/11, the Bush administration took a bunch of disparate parts of the federal government, including INS, and mushed it into the new Homeland Security Department, which was, manned by a guy named Tom Northridge, who was the governor of Pennsylvania. And he and they when they kind of redid that, they really kind of undid the tremendous progress that had been done by the Clinton administration in the 90s to kind of make the INS a functional organization, which it was not when the Clintons got into power. And unfortunately, ever since then, it was renamed ICE, and since then, it really hasn't functioned very well at all. And there have been different attempts by the Bush administration, the Obama administration, the Trump administration, the Biden administration, the Trump administration again, to get ICE working and functioning more carefully. The reality is, economically speaking, the amount of sort of low end labor we need is a lot. That's why I said I'm quite comfortable kind of cutting off the H-1Bs, because we have lots of skilled, educated workers. No shortage of those. We do need people in fields picking vegetables. So I think we have to kind of look at the whole labor market, work with companies, figure out what they need and they're looking for, and then do that. But little thing, chain migration, not so good. I was in favor of the remittances tax. We have let immigration, to a certain degree, get out of control. And I'm not anti-immigrant or anything like that, but I'm not one of those people who's open borders are fake, all that sort of thing. No. I do think it is vitally important that we know who's coming here, where, why, and when, and we have, we are smart about how we do that. Turning ICE into a Gestapo and pulling people off the road is not the way to do that. Have a process. Have something dignified and civilized that people can go through. Use actual intelligence to find people. This is how you do it. All this does is create articles like this, judgments like this, protests, video. It's not good for the narrative, and it's not a good way to fix immigration in this country. So, again, not surprised that this has happened. It's, yeah. Anyway, let's move on. I saved this story from Fortune because it's very reminiscent of something I wrote about in America's Lost Generation about needs not in education, employment, or training. NEET, not in education, employment, or training. And I had written about this in looking at through the lens of millennials who suffer from this and Gen Z suffering from it too. And I think this is, interesting about we're now getting headlines. When I was looking for the NEET phenomena, I really had to dig for the people that were writing about this. For this to be in Fortune magazine is quite significant. And we start with the headline. Gen Z grad says being unemployed is harder than a 9-to-5 because most workers would have a breakdown dealing with the admin. He's among the NEET men frozen out of the workforce. That's actually true. Looking for a job is more stressful than having a job. The amount of paperwork, you're constantly doing applications, everyone has a different account system that you have to sign up for. Everybody wants something different. If you're supposed to rewrite your resume for, every single time, you've got a tab with AI open. It's out of control. And especially nowadays when you have to apply to, so many, dozens, hundreds of jobs before you get anything. The reality is you're basically doing, this level of admin work all the time. And it says here, college-educated Gen Z men are stuck in the class of NEETs, not in employment, education, or training. Many are watching their careers derail before they've even started. Quote, it's a full-time job trying to claim benefits was one of the positives, a Gen Z grad has complained in a series of TikTok videos. Been working harder than a 9-to-5 employee lately. The male user blasted another, and the brutal wake-up call has struck a generational nerve. The 27-year-old Joshy B, as he goes by on TikTok, has been unemployed and job hunting since graduating with a master's in business in October. In his popular videos, the Gen Zer from Edinburgh explains that he has hoped 2 degrees would secure him a place in the corporate world so he could finally escape life on a council estate, public housing. This is in Britain. But he's been shocked that since tossing his graduation cap in the air, he's instead been forced to live off unemployment benefits, and that in itself can feel like a full-time job. The job hunt is still impossible, he says in one video, adding that he's competing against over 100 applicants for low-wage entry-level jobs and getting few interviews. I could have been working in a warehouse and gotten a promotion or two, and the time it took to do that master's probably would have given me more of an advantage. Josh explains that the government pays him £400 a month, or $497, but he has to keep track of all his job hunting activity for the keep. So although I do want a job, you're spending the whole time getting ready for those weekly meetings. More young men are becoming NEETs than women, not in employment, education, or training. Josh is far from alone. Gen Z graduates are discovering their qualifications no longer guarantee a direct path to graduate schemes, high-profile jobs, or even the foot in the door they once did. Just 10 years ago, 94% of students had either landed work or went into further education in the 1 year after graduating, according to data from the UK Department of Education. In 2024, just 59% of grads had full-time jobs 15 months after graduating. They make up a growing class of NEETs that is not in employment, education, or training, with college-educated men particularly hard hit. Separate data suggests that while the share of female Gen Z grads participating in the workforce has steadily increased, the participation rate for their male counterparts has nosedived since 2023. In the 6 months after graduating, another Gen Zer, Max Onken, applied for 20 jobs a day and has mostly heard nothing back. He's been hunting for 2 years now. I have now lowered the amount of applications I do because I find that so many of the adverts out there are completely bust. My degree was supposed to get me a job. Gen Z law graduate James Harrison similarly spent 15 months applying for jobs and even got rejected for a barista role at Cafe Nero before landing his current paralegal gig. Meanwhile, in the States, Hunter Howell, a 22-year-old and grad with a degree in business administration, submitted north of 1,700 job applications. In his 10 months of job hunting, he only landed one full-time offer. Likewise, on Joshy's TikTok videos, amid the stream of hate from users calling him a lazy scrounger, there are sympathies of men in similar positions. 50 applications, 4 interviews, and 1 year later, nothing, one young male user wrote. Another man echoed, going through the same thing right now. The classes of 2023 and 2024 are confronting a tougher job market than those who graduated during the Great Resignation, when hiring rates and wages hit a record high. It's a trend that Louis Mala, CEO of the global recruitment agency Bentley Lewis, has witnessed too. While young college-educated women are making do by widening their job search, Mala has seen their male counterparts try to wait it out. Many seem to be holding out for that, quote, dream job that ticks all the boxes of seeing the value in starting somewhere and working their way up, he tells Fortune, while adding that traditionally male jobs in tech and finance have been especially impacted by the economy. I also think there's a still outdated idea of what kind of work is acceptable for men, he adds. They don't want to take jobs they see as beneath them, even if it's just to get by. And when you add in how complicated it is to get benefits, it's no wonder many are feeling discouraged. His advice to young men, you don't need to have it all figured out right away. Quote, it's tough entering the workforce with that kind of pressure, Malice says. I always tell them there's so much value in trying different things in your 20s. Your early career is about exploring and learning. You have all those social media posts about overnight success. Building a career, just like building a successful business, takes time and effort, and more people need to talk about that, he stresses. I think it's funny that the only advice this guy offers is, well, they're lazy, they're not doing other types of work, they're not working up, all this type of thing, without ever talking about the root cause of this. Without ever talking about the systemic, the systemic end of this. I don't think anybody, not that you go into as much debt in the UK as you do in the US, but nobody's going to school to get an MBA to then be at the Panda Express. Remember that whole thing on Twitter about the whole everyone's like, oh yeah, well they're paying good wages at Panda Express. Like, no one's going through all of that to work a job you don't need education for. Like, that's the point of education, sort of thing. And I think the idea, that like many seem to be holding out for that dream job that ticks all the boxes. Oh, you mean like the job that affords them to actually live? Like, it's kind of funny how people just kind of like, well, just take take anything. It's kind of like, I mean, yeah, at a certain level, a dollar in the door is a dollar in the door. Who are we to complain? No one. But I think it's also incredibly entertaining that these articles always have the same thing. But it's kind of like, well, these things take time to build and all this type of thing. As someone who went through the Great Recession, I will tell you that every year, every month, but every year, you don't have a job in your field, it gets harder to break in. Every year that you're not making decent money and can save, you are losing a fortune in future savings. Every weird job you take that builds your resume is one more kind of point against you in getting hired for something that you actually do want. And that's even supposing you're getting paid enough to actually live, actually exist, find a date, get married, anything like that, do anything fun at all. There is, it's, and the reality is you start this now and you wake up and 5 years have gone by, you've never worked in your field, you're still kind of doing data stuff, and that's what I talk about in America's Lost Generation. And I save this because I talk quite extensively comparing NEETs against hikikomori in Japan, and it's interesting how even many decades after Japan's own economic changes and Great Recession, that they still have these men who refuse to go outside and engage in society. And then there's weird social things with Japan and inside of all that. So our needs are very different in that way. But there's an economic story there as well. And there's one here too. The economy is not growing fast enough and producing enough jobs to employ young people. That's the story. That's the story. And the fact that that's not the discussion, that there's a major economic problem here, and this is something worth addressing at a government level, is extremely frustrating. And I've always found it extremely frustrating. And I feel bad for Gen Z kids, because they were writing this articles about millennials in 2009. To be kind of like, oh, millennials are lazy. They're looking for the magic job. Oh, you went to college, go into the trades. Why did you waste your time in college? All this other. I've lived through 15 years of a negative narrative about how young people just can't get it together. And now it's Gen Z's turn to be reading articles like this and have poor people like me talk about them. Um, it's quite depressing, and no one ever gets to the root of the economy is not working for the everyday person. And we are producing another generation of young people who are graduating into a tough economy. How many more years do we have to play the same dumb game? Apparently, many more. Moving along. Someone texted me actually. People forget that I do the news hour. Um, but it's dear friend. This article in Politico is very interesting. And this new Federal Reserve study says that the 1918 flu pandemic has a tie to Nazi Party gains in Germany. And it says here, a new academic paper produced by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York concludes that deaths from the 1918 influenza pandemic, quote, profoundly shaped German society, unquote, in subsequent years and contributed to the strength of the Nazi Party. The paper, published this month and authored by New York Fed economist Christian Blickel, examined municipal spending levels and voter extremism in Germany from the time of the initial influenza outbreak until 1933, and shows that areas which experienced a greater relative population decline due to the pandemic spent less per capita on their inhabitants in the following decade. The paper also shows that, quote, influenza deaths of 1918 are correlated with an increase in the share of votes won by right-wing extremists, such as the National Socialist Workers' Party, in Germany's 1932 and 1933 elections. Together, the lower spending and flu-related deaths, quote, had a strong effect on the share of votes won by extremists, specifically the extremist National Socialist Party, the Nazis, the paper posits. This result is stronger for right-wing extremists and largely non-existent for left-wing extremists. Despite becoming properly known as the Spanish flu, the influenza pandemic likely originated in the United States at a Kansas military base, eventually infecting about one-third of the global population and killing at least 50 million people worldwide, according to the CDC. Germany experienced roughly 287,000 influenza deaths between 1918 and 1920. The paper's findings are likely due to, quote, changes in societal preferences following the 1918 outbreak. Blickel argues that the influenza pandemic's disproportionate toll on young people may have spurred resentment of foreigners among the survivors and driven voters to parties whose platform matched such sentiments. The conclusions come amid fears that the current coronavirus pandemic will shake up international politics and spur extremism around the world, as officials and public health experts look to previous outbreaks for guidance on how to navigate the months and years to come. Of course, there's no significant evidence yet to judge how the novel coronavirus will affect the city's spending or alter voting preferences, and unlike the influenza pandemic a century ago, the disease has proven especially fatal among older people. Historians have generally attributed the rise of the Nazi Party to multiple structural causes, including economic and social devastation wrought by the First World War and the widespread frustration among the German population about the post-war Weimar Republic. Blickel did not directly address those broader factors, but the paper did, quote, control for the influences of local unemployment, city spending, population changes brought on by the war, and local demographics. Quote, given a number of econometric challenges, we are cautious about the interpretation of our results, Blickel acknowledges. Nevertheless, the study offers a novel contribution to the discussion surrounding the long-term effects of pandemics. I think this is very interesting because pandemics do, and I did a podcast about this called Opium, Opiates, Pandemics, and Wars. And I talk about the geopolitical implications of widespread epidemics and pandemics. And how, you know, when there's a lot of secular things change quite quickly. And when I saw this guy and I read it over, and I'm kind of like, huh, fascinating, very interesting. It was kind of a very kind of interesting sort of idea, that kind of two things you wouldn't necessarily link together. And I was kind of like, yeah, I hadn't necessarily had that thought, but it makes a lot of sense given, you know, how when you have a mass death event, it changes society in profound ways for long periods of time. I think a lot of the political backlash we've seen in this country comes from COVID and the COVID response. If I read one more comment on Twitter that says, like, Comey COVID lockdowns, or my business was destroyed, or my life was destroyed, or whatever have you, and I'm very sympathetic to those people. But I mean, I think a lot of where we are right now politically, not just in this country, is because of COVID. I think really that's kind of the meta that we've been living under for the past 5 years. It will be interesting to see what happens 5 years from now. When, you know, when things when we've gotten a little distance from it and things have sort of recovered and renormalized. And I mean, it's kind of, shocking. 5.5 years ago, we were in the middle of the pandemic and getting ready for a presidential election, and it seems like it was yesterday and it seems forever ago. It seems like another world, and yet it's not. And I think that I think it'll be interesting to see how, as time goes on and we learn more, how all this shakes up. But I think I blame a lot of our present political dysfunction squarely on the back of COVID. Moving right along. Oh, this is good. So remember I was talking about the ICE was acting like Gestapo in LA and the judge stopping it? Well, piling on to that, I found this story, this fascinating account by someone who actually went to an ICE job fair, paints a picture of an empire in terminal decline, with sociopaths, racists, and macho men alongside bored and alienated folks joining the Gestapo to fill an emptiness in their lives. And it says here, I learned all the skills in the army. Smash and grab, side exploitation, and never got to use them, he said. So I'm kind of here to do what I learned to do over there, but this time here defending my country. Previously impressed by the connections between war and domestic policy elucidated by historians Kathleen Belew and Stuart Schrader, I found this man's account almost embarrassingly transparent. This was the most straightforward articulation I ever heard of someone bringing the war home. Other applicants offered similar explanations for their motives. There was the young, taciturn Southerner managing a batting cage near New Orleans, and the pimply youth from Kentucky churning out Yahoo Finance content for $20 an hour. Both said they were tired and bored. The latter said his father had been an ICE, but he didn't really know what he did. I spoke to a gregarious New York police officer who was fed up with patrolling Times Square and all quote the savages unquote there. Another applicant said he was sick of installing office furniture on properties subleased by the United States Marines. A blind man I spoke to who was hoping to find a data-centric position with ICE said he was sick of his current job collecting child support payments from delinquent parents. At present, he said, his, quote, hands were tied, unquote, because the law in his state forbade him from sending in sheriffs to collect money from deadbeat dads. In a lilting basso voice, he told me that, quote, in college, I wrote several papers about the harms of illegals in America, unquote. And the quote tweet is great. What he was really interested in, he said, was parlaying his wages as a deportation officer into buying Airbnbs. Oh, and this came from Plus One Mag, in case you were wondering. And it says the most motivating force behind American career fascism would appear to be wanderlust. The U.S. is filled with, quote, pretty nice guys, unquote, who are ready to inflict, who've already inflicted senseless and life-shattering violence on innocent, impoverished people. Obviously, I'm not, I'm probably not really aligned with this person. But, I mean, yes, when you're I think the inflicted senseless life-shattering violence on innocent, impoverished people is definitely quite accurate for the type of... I've always said, and I've said this about law enforcement on other jobs, a lot of the issues with these institutions is not the institutions themselves, it's the people they attract to work in them. And the reality is, in something like ICE, and many police departments, but that's another conversation, this is these type of people are who get attracted to do it. They're willing to stomp a boot on somebody's neck, knock in a door, all this type of thing. And that quote about, really just wanting to buy Airbnbs, and they're ready to inflict, senseless life. I mean, yeah, welcome to America. No one who's been in this country for any length of time would be quite as surprised by any of this. But I also said they're both tired and bored. Men need something to do. Men need a project. Men need a purpose. They need a mission greater than themselves. Ask anybody who's ever tried to get a group of men to do anything, or any military or police. I mean, any institution like that. It's a lot. It's always talk about mission. Sublimating yourself to the mission. A lot of men are very happy to sublimate themselves to something that they believe in. And especially given our story about the job market for young men, it's, anytime the domestic job market goes to hell in a handbasket, military recruiting always goes up. It does. It's been true for decades, since the end of the draft in Vietnam. And right now, ICE has just got $140 billion and is hiring, all sorts of things. And they'll, oh, you're reasonably fit, got a pulse, can pass a background check. Wonderful, you're hired. This is, yeah, this is our country. I think as I said before, there's a way to deal with immigration that does not involve this. There's a better way to do it, and I hope we can find that better way, but increasingly I don't think we will. I think I know where this is going. And it's the senseless, life-shattering violence on innocent, impoverished people. That's where this is going. There has to be an outlet for the popular rage. People are unhappy with where the country is going. There's too many undesirables. And in a lot of societies, when there's too many undesirables around, civilization tends to go out the window and we start killing people en masse. And unfortunately, I think that's kind of where this is going. It's going to be roundups, it's going to be alligator Alcatraz, it's going to be all that stuff. And the reality is, if you were an immigrant right now, I would advise you, if you can afford to leave, please do so, because you're in danger, child. Quite simply. Yeah, that's, it's a very dark time that we find ourselves in. Very, very dark time. I'm going to wrap up on this. One, this person can go to hell in a handbasket. I'm just going to start with that. The State Department fired over 1,300 people this week, and there was celebration, applause, and whatnot, as people packed up their personal belongings and began to leave. This awful person decided to state publicly that, quote, watching theater kids get fired from tax-funded jobs may be my new favorite hobby. Well, first of all, you can go get stuffed. Kate Hyde from New York, you can go get stuffed. Tell your friends, spread this around, let people know, you can get stuffed. It's not just theater kids who work these jobs, okay? There are here's the dumb thing about a lot of government jobs. As someone who has a degree that would normally have a government job, it's actually not an easy thing to get a government job, especially if you're not ex-military. The government has a points-based hiring system. So if you think that the only people working these jobs are disaffected theater kids who could never find anything else to do in the market, yeah. Do you follow the president's advice about drinking bleach? May I suggest you do so. That's not who's working in these jobs. Now, in terms of getting rid of people and reducing staff and all this type of thing, we already know they're doing it in the Department of Education. It's been happening across the whole government. This is, relative to the size of the State Department, 1,300 people is not very much. All in all. But it is a very sad thing because these people did do important work. One of the stories I love is all the Doge kids are going to be like, yeah, we actually didn't find that much fraud, waste, and abuse. The government's actually surprisingly efficient, sort of thing. Like, it wasn't what we thought it would sort of be. And, this is going to have an effect on the employment market. And also, and here's the other thing, and this is the part I always start from. In politics, whatever we're talking about, I always start from, these are real people. Using dismissive terms like theater kids is extremely dehumanizing. Not in that where we're being made fun of way, but in terms of, these are people with mortgages, children, car payments, credit card bills, who are basically getting fired for politics. Of people like this person, who has decided that this is her new favorite thing. And that, she's going to have some fun watching the bad people that she doesn't like and approve of get their final comeuppance. I hope it's comfortable up there on top of Smug Mountain, Kate Hyde. I really do. And I'll tell you why. Because these are real human beings, just like you're a real human being. And if you strip away the politics, and you strip away that you're snide remarks about stuff, because that's all you can offer is snide remarks. You don't offer any actual solutions or anything actually helpful. All you do is offer snide remarks. these are real people who you probably actually have more in common with than you think of, because they have many of the same problems that you do. The only difference is they're probably nicer people than you are. And they probably wouldn't want to be friends with you because you're not the sort of person who can afford to be friends with decent people. Simple as. I feel sorry for everyone who's getting let go at the State Department. I always kind of dreamed of working there. Well, I wanted to do two things. I wanted to go to Brussels and work at the National Court of Justice as a lawyer, or I wanted to work at the State Department. Attempted both, didn't work out. Now I'm here doing the news for you. But that, I feel very sorry for, people who are going through this, because they are real human beings who are the victims of changes in policy and politics, and I sincerely wish them well, and I wish more everyday people like Kate Hyde here, would have a little bit of empathy and sympathy for what's going on, not from a political perspective, but simply from a human perspective. I will say, though, look for more of this honestly shitty attitude from people going forward, because that the point, none of this, the firings, the department endings, all this type of thing, none of it is actually helping anyone. The amount of money saved here is negligible. The cruelty is the point. It's so people like Kate Hyde can sit smugly in their house and feel like someone's finally getting punished. That's it. That's the only reason they're doing this. And if that's horrifying or shocking to you, it shouldn't be. That's the theme of what we're going through. The cruelty is the point. I think a lot of the ideas that they have around reducing the size of the government are probably necessary and needed. Government does have a bad habit of getting bloated over time if you don't trim the fat from time to time. But there's also, better, nicer, kinder ways of doing it, but they're not doing that because the cruelty is the point. It's punishing every person, a part of every institution, who made the COVID lockdowns happen, who made them feel shame. And honestly, in human life, and I will say this for sure, in human life, there is nothing worse, more toxic, and more dangerous than shame. Literally got Hitler into power and started World War II, and that's not even hyperbole. That's not even me joking. Literally. Shame is such a powerful, powerful force. And for better or for worse, a lot of the narrative coming from the left over many years now has been one of shaming people for, insert it here, being white, their ethnic background, their job, their education, their opinions, their thought, all this type of thing. And this is the backlash. You made them feel shame. And they will now watch every single person they think responsible for it suffer. Starting from a guy in the parking lot of Home Depot who's a day laborer, up to people that work in the State Department. That's the whole point of this. Shame, 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 and shame again. And if you really want to loop it back around, there's the old rumor that the reason Trump ran for president is because Obama made fun of him at the White House Correspondents' Dinner in 2015. And talk about someone who can't stand to be shamed. And when you start looking at this stuff through that lens, it all starts to make a whole lot of sense. Food for thought. Anyway, I'm tired. This Red Bull ain't doing a damn thing. So I'm going to get out of here. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. We had a great group tonight. Thank you so much for the person who liked the live. Thank you so much. My name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Joel News Hour. You can find me across all social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter and Instagram, at Cameron Journal on Blue Sky and LinkedIn. Make sure to go sign up for the newsletter, Cameron Journal Plus. I could really use the support right now to subscribe to Cameron Journal Plus. So make sure to go and do that. And I will see you all next week for the Cameron Journal News Hour. Stay safe out there. Bye-bye.